What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS value plays for this week's Genesis Invitational. We've got ourselves another elevated field and the big cat out there, so a ton of excitement, a lot more eyes on golf this week. And in this value plays video, I'm going to break down the bottom half of the Draftkings pricing board. Yesterday we had our core plays. We're focusing on some of those top end elite tier options, and now going to try and do some dumpster diving to bring you guys some salary savings and of course some of that much needed ownership leverage for these large field contests. So a lot to get into. Let's go ahead and hop into our first value play. Shaith is the first player that I have my eye on. So towards the top end of the pricing range here, so $7,800, not nearly as cheap as some of the other options, but on a comparative basis, I think you're looking at a player that could be in the top end of the 8K range. And in the next year, maybe year and a half, you're going to start to see him priced in that range, if not the 9K range, because Shaith, the talent level is clear, it's evident as can be. He's got that pop ability, multiple runner-up finishes during his rookie season, but of late has gotten a lot more consistent, kind of like Sebastian Munoz, who went out there, was extremely volatile to start his career, right? Had a few top-end finishes, would mix it in with plenty of cuts. That's kind of how Shaith started his career. Had those flashes during the West Coast swing this time last year, and in between was, had some of his downfalls, right? After that swing, missed a few cuts, but as the season progressed, really took his game to another level. And it's kind of reminiscent of what we saw with a Cam Smith a few years ago and Sam Burns. When I really started to get into playing high stakes DFS, or when you started to see a Cam Smith kind of emerge, start to have a little bit more consistency with his game. And of course, with Sam Burns, you've seen that over the last year and a half, 2 years. And I'm getting the same kind of vibe with Shaith. His talent level is clearly on the same kind of level as those sort of players, and you're starting to see him put together that consistency. So when you take a look at the recent form, you'll get an idea for what I'm talking about here. $7,800. You can see, made the cut last time out, top 5 finish, a few other just pedestrian performances, but still making it to the weekend. Did have the second place back there at the RSM Classic, so still showing that he has that top end upside, but now the floor is just so much higher than it was before that I'm not sure if he should be a 7K golfer. He's priced around guys like Wyndham Clark, Siwoo Kim, even Ricky Fowler and Justin Rose, who at this point I think are inferior players to Shaith. Shaith, arguably more consistent than every player on that list, even at this young age. And in my opinion, the upside, sure, a few of them have wins of late, but for the longer term sample size, Shaith has more top 5 finishes than all of them over the last season. So I think that he's mispriced, could easily be in that 8K range. And like a Burns, like a Cam Smith before he went over there to live, it was almost inconceivable that they were $7,000 golfers before. And I think by the end of just this season alone, they could be seeing the same thing about Theegala. So when he's going to be priced in the 7K range in these top end fields, I'm going to take advantage as many times as possible, particularly when it's as solid a course fit as what we have here. So you take a look at the last 36 measured rounds. Let's go up here to Shaith. Top end here of the pricing range. Losing off the tee, a lot of that due to accuracy. One thing in his favor here around Riviera is that you have some of the hardest to hit fairways in all of the PGA Tour, and also 0 water hazards on property. A lot of the strokes that he's losing off the tee has to do with him having so many penalty strokes, and also at courses where accuracy is a little bit more important. This week, it's all about the distance, and Shaith has no problem getting it out there 300 to 310 yards through the air. The approach play has been a positive over the last 36 rounds, and really what he's known for is the creative short game and being one of the better putters on tour. You'll put him out here on the West Coast swing, get him on greens, grasses that he's familiar with, right? Went to school at Pepperdine out there. And I think you're going to get an even better version of Shaith. So even though last week was slightly disappointing, would say, with the finish, right? 39th at a course that he was a runner-up last year, is definitely regression from that perspective. But that's why we're getting him here in the 7K range. And at this point, he's only 10.6% owned. So I know last year, I believe he played here last year. Let me go ahead and refresh my memory. So $7,800, did play here last year, make the cut. Didn't do much with it, so it wasn't very memorable there with a 48th place finish. But given that he grew up in this part of the country, his around the green play, I think, is heavily underrated. He has some of the better hands on the entire PGA Tour, and you've seen him make plenty of those crazy breaking putts. I mean, the one at the Farmers really comes to mind that we saw a few weeks ago, where it ended up breaking like 2 or 3 feet to the right and then about 7 to 10 feet to the left there at the end, down one of the sharpest hills you're going to see around Torrey Pines, and was absolute Drano with it. So I know that he's got that creativity. Again, he's known for that short game prowess, kind of has that Jordan Spieth-like ability to get up and down from some pretty tough spots that he's putting himself in, which is what you're going to get when you have a young, aggressive player like Thigala, right? He goes at pretty much every single pin. He has not an ounce of fear in his body, and that can get him into trouble, but he does have the ability to extract himself from some pretty tough situations you'll see from time to time. Before getting into our last 3 value picks, just want to remind you, if you want access to the spreadsheets you see in my video, everything that is blacked out, make sure to join my Patreon page. There is a link in the description of the video to it. It is $10 a month, gets you access to all of my DFS projections, projection sheets, research sheets, all of my prop analysis that I'm doing over there for Underdog and Prize Picks. So if you've been looking to get a little behind the scenes access to what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, the best way to check it out, and of course support me here on the channel too. So check it out if you guys were looking for that access, and right back to the action. Next up, we've got ourselves Tommy Fleetwood. He's $7,300, same exact price tag as the Big Cat, which I'll give 5-10 seconds to touch on right here. I hope he has a great week. I bet him to make the cut as a little bit of a prop bet from the entertainment side, but realistically, I don't think he has a great shot this week. I think that he could make the cut. That's realistic. But anything in terms of being GPP relevant, it's not something that I see. So unless you're going to go out there, play him in a few lineups just for entertainment's sake, or perhaps take him for the make the cut prop that you have a few boosted lines on across the industry, maybe avoid the Big Cat. But at that price tag, in this sort of price range, Tommy Fleetwood makes plenty of sense. Coming in as a fantastic course fit, you can see he's top 15 in the field when it comes to his Riviera fit. The recent form leaves a little bit to be desired, but if we take a little bit of a step back, right, don't judge him over the last 2-3 starts that he's had on tour, you get a much better picture for the game of Tommy Fleetwood, where last year he was a top 5 finisher in multiple major championships. I believe actually 3 out of the 4 majors, which is pretty mind-blowing. You take a look at it off the tee, gaining over 1/3 of a stroke per round. That's despite having some really piss-poor off the tee play over his last few events, gaining close to 3/4 of a stroke per round on approach, and gaining over half a stroke per round around the greens. Now, the X factor here is that on POA, it's not the best surface for him, but you can see he's a slight positive, which compared to the negative we've seen over the last 2-3 months for Tommy Fleetwood is a huge positive, right? It's an entire 0.2 strokes better. So if anything, we'd expect him to get a little bit better on these POA surfaces. We know that the ball striking and around the green play is what he's known for, and that's what we need at the Genesis. We need players that excel in major-like conditions, and like I said, he was by far his best last year in the strongest field events and also when conditions got the toughest. So though the recent form, kind of like you saw with Shaith, leaves a little bit to be desired, right? Has the missed cut. Even on the DP World Tour, he made a few cuts, didn't do anything too great over there overseas. About 20th place finish over there a few months ago. Not really flashy, so I think the ownership stays lower than it should be. You take a look at the course history, he hasn't played here in over 3 years, but the last 2 times he played here 4 or 5 years ago was a 28th and a 37th place finish, so certainly serviceable, kind of what you'd expect for Tommy Fleetwood, and he's gotten a lot better over the last 3 to 4 months. Beginning of last year, there were concerns that he was even going to keep his tour card. In fact, lost status on the PGA Tour, was only getting into events because of sponsorship exemption status. And then after those top finishes at majors, after he went out there, broke through a few times on tour for top 10s, has gone back to legitimate status on tour. But, even 3-4 years ago, when he wasn't really the guy he is today, was going out there and making cuts at this event. So I think that's a really good sign for his course fit, which makes sense given just how stout he is around the green. And then given how solid the ball striking has been, I mean, he could legitimately win this golf tournament. So the fact that he's 7% owned, kind of like Shaith, it's not like he's being completely overlooked. In fact, he's higher owned than quite a few people in this range, but I think it's warranted, kind of like Shaith, right? I think he could be $1,000 more expensive. Tommy Fleetwood was in the 8K range last week, or at least very close to it. I believe lower end of that 8K range there for the waste management at $7,300. Mispriced, probably should be like 15 to 20% owned, and somebody I'll definitely have in my GPP lineups. Next up, we've got ourselves Nick Hardy. So down into the 6K range now, getting a little bit cheaper, definitely having to take a few more shots as you get down on the board here. But Nick Hardy was mega chalk a few weeks ago at the Farmers. I believe at Pebble Beach, you got some attention too, and a lot of it had to do with his POA numbers, which under a limited sample had been excellent, was gaining over a stroke per round. Well, you can see over the last few events, that has come back down to earth. In fact, he's lost prolifically hemorrhage strokes on the greens over the last few events. He's still a slight positive, which when you compare that to his last 36 rounds is about half a stroke better, because we know Nick Hardy is just not the best putter on tour. So even though the putting struggles of late are concerning and they have brought that POA number down back to earth, you kind of hope that those first few performances, which was actually a 3-event sample size, is a sign of potentially some popability, because he went to school out this way, has plenty of experience out there in the West Coast. You take a look at the shots gain metrics, particularly on approach, he's been ridiculous, gaining over a stroke per round. He's one of the longer players on tour, so at a course where it's power over accuracy, you gotta like that for Nick Hardy. And though around the green he's not the best player, we're starting to get to this 6K range, right? These guys are gonna have holes in their game. You're talking about next to no ownership on Hardy, where just a few weeks ago on the West Coast swing, he was the chalk of all chalk, right? 10-15% owned. Now people want to just toss him aside, even though he's still a top 20 Riviera fit, even with the POA numbers coming back down to earth, and a top 25 total model ranking fit. So value across the board, whether it's, course fit or, of course, recent form. You take a look at the event history, he's never played here, right? So has no course experience, which for a nuanced course like you have here with Riviera, probably not the best, right? You want guys that kind of know the shots that are required, but Nick Hardy also doesn't know what he's missing. So kind of like a Cam Young last year, who in his first ever performance was able to have a tied for second place finish. I don't want to write him off, and I think he's got a legit shot to at least crack the top 10 this week. All right, our last value here is going to be towards the bottom half of the board. Actually, not even bottom half, bare bottom of the pricing board at $6,200, Lee Hodges. Last year, he was a hot commodity towards the playoffs. Last few events of the year, people finally caught on to his ball striking ability. And then during the fall swing, people played him as chalk, and he really disappointed people. And over the last 3 events, you can see he's continued that trend, missing 3 out of his last 4 weeks. I mean, he hasn't even played all 4 weeks. He's missed all 3 of his starts over that stretch, though the ball striking has remained, and a lot of those missed cuts have been directly on the number. In fact, 2 out of those 3 missed cuts were on the number. So it's not like he's playing atrocious golf, and the ball striking numbers reflect that. Gaining over a third of a stroke per round off the tee, 0.3 strokes per round on approach, and the putting and around the green numbers aren't even that bad. So I think if you look at just the finishes, like a lot of casual golf fans will, you're not even going to consider Lee Hodges here, yet he's hitting it pretty well. And then when we've gotten him on POA Anua greens before, you can see he's gaining over a third of a stroke per round, a whole 0.4 strokes better than what we've seen over those last 36, right? Where he's losing, 0.03 shots per round, something like that. And in fact, typically a little bit worse than that. I mean, putting is the clear weakness of a Lee Hodges game. So I like the numbers on POA. I like the fact that, the results aren't really indicative of how he's been striping it of late. He's long off the tee, and the event history is non-existent too, right? So he hasn't played here before. He's coming in with a completely clean slate at this point. He actually, take that back, he finished 39th place here last year. That's surprising. I didn't think he qualified for the Genesis, particularly because he was a rookie last season, but I guess he slipped in there as an alternate, one of the last few guys in, and made the cut. So he has that experience, something that I honestly wasn't even considering with the play to begin with. It's a huge positive, because kind of like I was saying before, this is a nuanced course. Getting up and down is extremely difficult. There's a lot of undulation on the greens. It's why I like a Tommy Fleetwood. It's why I like a Shaith Theegala, who is extremely creative. We've seen that at plenty of courses to this point. Hodges at least has seen the course over 4 rounds before, is going to get his practice rounds this week. And when you're comparing him to a few other rookies down here, like Nakajima, who I believe has never seen the course before. I mean, guys like Kim down here have never seen it. I mean, you have winners like JB Holmes, of course, but Lee Hodges is still striping it of late. So he's got that experience, which again, I didn't even realize before making the pick there. I could have sworn that he wouldn't even qualified for the event last year, so that was a little bit eye-opening. But the ball striking stats have been there. We've known that. That's why I love getting to Lee Hodges. and I think that recent form's a little bit misleading too. So love the play, super cheap if you use Lee Hodges. You combine him with another cheap option, whether it's the bottom of the 7K range, top end of the 6K range. You can really take that studs and duds approach. Take a Rory, take a JT if you want to in that lineup. Maybe it's take a Rory plus 2 9K options. You can make that kind of lineup work when you're willing to be this aggressive down low. And if I'm going to take the shot down low, I'm going to do it with a ball striker like Lee Hodges that surprisingly also made the cut here last year. So love the play, love the salary savings and the leverage that you're getting there too, and think it could be very useful in large field contests. All right, fellas, that is all I've got for this week's value plays. Before you hopping out of here, go ahead, smash that like button. Also, go ahead, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss any of the content in the future. We'll be going live tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Eastern, going over the weather, all of your live questions. So bring anything you've got for me along to the stream, and I'll get it answered for you, whether it's for Draftkings, on the prop side, for prize picks or underdog. Everything is on the table. We can talk matchups. We can talk cash plays. It's your time. Ready to go out there, smash this week. Let's make it a useful and productive there. So looking forward to that. Like I said, I appreciate all the support here. Go ahead, comment down below what your top play below $8,000 is, and try to make it something that wasn't mentioned on the video. Well, if you agree with one of the 4 picks that much, feel free to go ahead and drop it down there in chat. But let me know what you guys are thinking. I like to get a pulse for the community, try and see who some of you guys are thinking in terms of those cheap plays. And let's go ahead and get it this week. Best of luck with all of those lineups, any DFS lineups, any outright bets you decide to go with. And I'll catch you guys for the live stream tomorrow evening.